Let's look at this largest and the most aggressive country on earth, Russia. It continues expanding, killing thousands of its own citizens and foreigners in the process. But here's a quick list that I will follow with a short explanation. Well, let's start with Moldova. Russians hacked a little piece called the Transnistria. It was 1992. Estonia, with a Russian minority, 1993. Belarus, huge country. We kind of like forget about Belarus, 1994. Chechnya, with Ramzan Kadyrov. It's actually a part of Russia, but a very important region. We'll talk about it a little bit. 1994, they've hacked it all the way till 2000. Georgia, with Abkhazia and Ossetia, 2008. And then Ukraine with Donbass and Crimea. It's the war since 2014 till present.
Welcome, viewers. We're very happy to see more and more of you on both sides of the Atlantic as we go into interview 7 with Dr. Bogdan Kotnis. I'm Bob Terzian. I'm your moderator, and the aim is to bring a Polish perspective to our view of geopolitics. So welcome, Bogdan, and good to be back with you.
Hey, Robert. It's great to be back. And I wanted to thank all the viewers. You're motivating the both of us. We're commenting on your involvement, and we appreciate you sending the shares to your friends, because just the numbers of people who are joining in are, it feels very good. So thanks to all of you, and again, bring on your questions and comments, and each of them is very important to us. So again, hi, Robert, let's do it.
So Bogdan, we've discussed Russian expansionism, and you mentioned Transnistria specifically in an interview. Can you elaborate on what you mean? What territories have the Russians annexed recently?
Let's just start from the beginning. Let's look at this largest and the most aggressive country on earth, Russia. It continues expanding, killing thousands of its own citizens and foreigners in the process. At the same time, it uses propaganda to project themselves as a peace-loving nation defending its God-given right to exist. If you look at the map to see how Europe looks from the perspective of Moscow and St. Petersburg, you'll understand. Russians pursue this long-range plan to move systematically, piece by piece, country after country, and they pounce anytime they feel that there is a chance, whenever they sense weakness or hesitation. And they don't limit their aggression to Europe. We've seen them in Cuba, South America, Asia, and lately ever so strongly in Africa.
What countries or territories have the Russians been attacking in Europe lately?
It's quite a list. And where they do not move by direct military action, they move by annexing fragments of the country, or just starting political pressure through their special ops. And if we're going to pretend that we don't see these annexed territories, we will not make Russia disappear from these lands. They now illegally control. With every annexed country, every city, and every village, they gain strength and they get more aggressive. But here's a quick list that I will follow with a short explanation. Well, let's start with Moldova. Russians hacked a little piece called the Transnistria. It was 1992. Estonia, with a Russian minority, 1993. Belarus, huge country. We kind of like forget about Belarus. 1994. Chechnya, with Ramzan Kadyrov. It's actually a part of Russia, but a very important region. We'll talk about it a little bit. 1994, they hacked it all the way till 2000. Georgia, with Abkhazia and Ossetia, 2008. And then Ukraine with Donbass and Crimea. It's the war since 2014 till present.
So you've mentioned 6 countries, Moldova, Estonia, Belarus, Chechnya, Georgia, and Ukraine. Let's talk about Transnistria. We'll take them one by one.
Okay, so Transnistria is the eastern part of Moldova. Is Transnistria created by Russia as a corrupt exclave, the haven for shady deals. Russians attacked Moldova in 1992, just a year after the Soviet Union collapsed, with an excuse to protect the abused Russian minority and secure Soviet leftover munition stockpiles. Transnistria is a convenient outpost in case Russians decide to attack Ukraine from the west along the Black Sea. It is now managed by Sheriff, apt name, a corporation that handles manufacturing and trade, mainly of alcohol, textiles, real estate, and very profitable Mercedes-Benz dealership. And it's a classic Russian colony run on terror and bribes. A KGB operative running this exclave to the west of Ukraine lives in Germany, actually. And conveniently, Sheriff, this company, can trade with Russia and the European Union as a Moldovan enterprise. But it does not pay any taxes to the Moldovan government. So it is a convenient front for dealing sanctions, defeating sanctions against Russia.
Interesting. What about Estonia with a Russian minority?
Estonia is one of the Baltic countries. Historically, Estonia was part of Poland, Sweden, Germany, and Russia. But when Russians regained control during World War II, they started using their old tricks. So they killed thousands of Estonians in ethnic cleansing raids. They relocated thousands in cattle cars to Siberia. And simultaneously, they brought ethnic Russians to have a Russian ethnic majority in major urban centers. And such was the status of Estonia when the Soviet Union collapsed and the Estonians declared independence. And now in 1993, the Russian majority in the cities of Narva and Siloame organized a referendum declaring that they were Russian-speaking autonomous regions of Estonia. But the Estonian government declared the referendum illegal. Nevertheless, Russia has been using the ethnic card and showing fake Estonian oppression of Russians to destabilize the government and lay ground for eventual attack whenever they feel the time is right.
It's beginning to sound like a pattern. Well, what happened in Belarus?
Belarus, for me, it's something that we're like pretending that is not there. It's like we talk about Lukashenko like if he owned a house. It's a huge country, but let's just get from the beginning. So Russia collapses 1991, and Stanislav Shushkevich was one of 3 leaders of the Soviet Union republics who signed the famous Białowieża agreements in December 1991, announcing that the Soviet Union ceased to exist as a country. And immediately after, Belarus regained independence Shushkevich proposed to the Poles that the time was right for a confederation of the two countries.
Hmm.
And of course, it was not like an overt act. It was done in a quiet halls of power, but Poles declined, arguing that the threat of Russian retaliation was too big. I'm going to tell you, one of the Polish politicians who talked to Shushkevich when he heard that, he fainted. Uh, so Russian special ops worked very hard to replace Shushkevich. Uh, he was the Belarusian parliament chairman, uh, and they, of course, handpicked a man. So in 1994, during the first presidential election in Belarus, Shushkevich was already falsely accused of bribery, which is a charge Russians often use against unfavorable leaders they wish to depose. And a Russian puppet, Lukashenko, took power. And to quote Radio Free Liberty, quickly constructed an authoritarian regime, jailing opponents, muzzling the media, stamping out competition, stifling dissent, and prolonging his time in office through elections and referendums that international observers said were not free, fair, or democratic. They were fake. And he barred Shushkevich from running for parliament in 2004. Thus, Lukashenko has kept the position of the president since then until today. So Belarus is a de facto Russian province with the Russian military moving freely around the so-called country. But it's convenient for Russia. They can play it in the United Nations. They can do a lot of things. So it's like Transnistria is a little chunk. Belarus is a big country. And remember, Russia launched its attacks against Ukraine from Belarus. And then Belarus is used to transport mostly Muslim migrants to the Polish border in its attempt to disrupt Poland and make it appear to be anti-Muslim. So there is a lot of things at play in Belarus.
Well, I think the next country on your list was Chechnya, but isn't Chechnya a province of Russia?
Yes, Bob, you're right. It's a province of Russia, but it's not because Chechens joined Russia voluntarily. They actually put up quite a fight to gain independence after the breakup of the Soviet Union, but they lost. The Russian war in Chechnya was a grim business where thousands died, and their capital, Grozny, was razed to the ground. And Russians hit hard in 1994, and they were pushing and pushing, but it took Putin to turn the region into a bloodbath in 2000 and finally finish the job. Russians installed Ramzan Kadyrov, an absolute ruler, the purveyor of life and death, in a true old Mongolian empire fashion. And whenever Putin needs fighters, Ramzan Kadyrov provides the troops. Chechens fight in Ukraine as the Zagrad Adriad, or Zagraditelny Adriady, translating into English, it means barrier or blocking troops, to shoot retreating Russian forces from the first line of attack. And in many Russian attacks in Ukraine, Chechens followed Russian soldiers recruited mostly from Buryatia, a Russian Asian province by the Mongolian border. So Buryats died in the first lines of attack. And Buryats did not stop or retreat, knowing that if they did, the Chechens would start shooting at them from behind.
Well, that explains something I never could understand, and that's why Russians would keep on attacking wave after wave despite heavy losses. So what was next? I think Georgia.
You're right. You're right. So if you look down south, you're going to see that Chechnya is just a little bit up north from Georgia. So once Putin took care of Chechnya, and that's where his fighters were coming from. Then he moved to the country south of Chechnya, Georgia, which was on the way to joining NATO and the European Union. So again, Russians decided to use their old tactics of divide and conquer and lie, claiming that they wanted to protect abused Russians in Georgian provinces of Abkhazia and Ossetia. So they moved their military in 2008. And the president of Georgia then was Grigory Saakashvili, and he put up a fight but had little chance against the Imperial Russian troops. And the West did not react much to this partition, making some meaningless appeasement, face-saving symbolic gestures. So the fact is, Georgian were conquered, and again, bits and pieces were hacked over, and Russians are running the government in Georgia.
Well, I guess the elephant in the bathtub is the current situation in Ukraine. So, what do you got to say about Ukraine?
Ukraine, yeah, Ukraine is the big prize. I believe that Putin was presented with a plan showing that all Ukrainian key military and political leaders were adequately bribed and ready to accept Russian domination before he started the 2022. And it worked in Donbass and in Crimea. I actually saw little movies where you would see the officer, the Ukrainian officer who was talking with the Russians, and eventually he would tell his troops to stay, to stay calm. And then, but the deal was done before they moved in 2014. So for 2022, the plan was to attack Kiev and capture President Zelensky. And Russians expected it would be a walk in the park like it had been in Donbass and Crimea. So the special operation of 2022 has been what I hope will be the biggest of Putin's blunders and his undoing. His plan is that the old Russian strategy would work yet again on Ukraine's foreign allies. So the Russians begin an incessant propaganda campaign of fear and horror in an attempt to stifle the willpower and unity of the West so that the West will give in to Russian demands. And we hear a lot of those politicians and media pundits who say how we should just let Russians do whatever they want. So that's why we had all these failed ceasefire proposals. And notice that in 2 years of an all-out assault, Russians have actually gained almost nothing significant. They had some inroads in the beginning. The Ukrainians fought them back. So the front line is more or less steady.
But those two failed ceasefire agreements took place in 2014, if I'm not mistaken. Do I understand that you're saying we need to look at all of these territories in totality in order to understand the scope of Russian offense or attack or whatever you want to call it?
If you listen to Russians, and especially, I've been in situations where I was talking with Russians and they didn't know that I was not a Russian because there's so many different, dialects and accents. So they look at us like we're dummies. They're the largest colonial empire, the leftover of the 19th century, actually. They're just bamboozling us. And we're just eating it because they can do it piece by piece, and we never connect the dots because we just take one thing at a time. Like, well, let's not get confused. Now we're dealing with this. Oh, it was a year ago, so it doesn't matter. So it's easy for them to have those long-term plans, and I think that Putin's going to go all the way, and I think that in his way, he thinks he's winning this confrontation, this war, this aggression in Ukraine. So they use their famous maskirovka, the strategy of deceit. And Russians want, first of all, to confuse and hide their overarching goals. That strategy of systematic push west to conquer the whole of Europe if there is a chance. And Russian actions are not limited to the western or eastern borders of Russia. We've seen them all over the place. Remember Cuban crisis, yes? So they have aggressive actions in Asia, in South America, and Africa. And it should be obvious that they will not stop in Ukraine, Poland, or even Spain. They continue following the plan initiated by Peter the Great and clearly formulated during the 1917 revolution. I think that it can be best understood by paraphrasing an old communist hymn, which goes like, we will continue this last fight until we envelop the whole world. And it goes well with Putin's been asked a few times. Recently, it was an exhibit in Crimea celebrating the Russian annexation of the land. And he was asked where the borders of Russia are. And he replied that Russia has no borders.
That's a pretty scary picture, especially when we look at our politicians squabbling over sending adequate aid to the Ukraine.
You know, what concerns me, Bob, is that we hear how we can confront Russians if we only make up our minds. But we've been making up our minds for 12 years. And as a result, today, Russians produce 3 times more munitions than we do. I don't think that many people realize that.
No.
And we're still making up our minds. So again, like in other of the interviews, I just say, let's wake up and face the facts. With every passing month, every Ukrainian soldier killed on the battlefield, the cost of stopping the Russians is increasing.
Well, it sounds like it's up to our politicians to decide what to do next. One thing is certain: sooner make up their mind, the better. Thank you, Bogdan. I hope to see you, viewers, for our next podcast. We appreciate your attendance. Send us your questions. Thank you, Bogdan.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, everyone. And you really make us feel great that on both sides of the Atlantic, people are paying attention. And they're paying attention not only, your average internet guys, but I hear that people in Warsaw and Washington are listening. So, guys, hi there, and I hope you're gonna come up with something really good for us. And I also promise we're gonna continue with the interviews. Thank you, Robert. Thank you all to all the viewers, and see you soon.